so you know who you have in front of you. Um,
Well, I was going
and
to introduce you if you want.
it's all good. I'm used to doing lots of podcasty
Okay.
chats and everything.
But you know what?
Um,
I wasn't recording it, and so I have a little spiel here.
oh yeah, you can do a spiel if you want. Spiel
Okay.
it up.
All right, here we go. Dr. Nell is the founder of the Transformative Reading Teacher Group and the current president of the Reading League Montana. She's an educational consultant, certified high performance coach, teacher of teachers, and insatiably curious about all things that have made people's lives better. She is an inspired human and an agent of positive change, working to revolutionize the way teachers think and apply their knowledge for the benefit of all children in their classrooms. She began her career as an undergraduate researcher at the University of Colorado at Boulder, where she earned her bachelor's and master's degree in speech and language pathology. Her first journey in becoming a teacher of teachers was a national letters trainer, and then she went on to obtain a literacy studies doctorate at MTSU. And thank you for being here, Nell. We appreciate
Yeah,
you
thank
very much.
you. I just was trying to put my PowerPoint up, realized I had it in the middle of the PowerPoint. We don't need to start in the middle, do we? We need to start at the beginning. So give me 2 seconds and we will get it going. I have this little Mac problem, if anybody could solve it. Every time I try to bring a PowerPoint up, it just wants to go in notes version. It doesn't ever want to go in presenter version until I do this little trick. I have to do a little trick to make it do it. So here we go. I'm doing the trick. And now it's going to work. And it worked. Here it comes. Sweet. Can you see it? Thumbs up.
Yep.
Sweet. All right. So, every now and again, I hop on the Facebook page. I during the pandemic started to have this like social media overload, and I bet we all did. So I was feeling the stress of it, and I took a little break. And then every now and again, I love to tap into the work that Donna has created on the Science of Reading page, because it gives me a pulse on where teachers across the nation are, and the questions they have, and if they're similar to a lot of the questions I'm facing in school districts. So I work in schools predominantly every week of my life. And so I'm working with educators in preschool, actually all the way down to toddlers. I'm a speech language pathologist, so that gives me that scope of practice to go birth to death. And so I've had a lot of experience with assessment as well. So and I left the subtitle in this as early identification of language and reading difficulties, including those pesky names like dyslexia and more. Assessment tools for identifying struggling readers, because when we want to know if things are aligned with SoR, we also kind of just want to know what to do. So I decided that I would try to pull in some thoughts I read on chat streams on the page, because that just gives me a pulse on where people are. And you know what? Like I said, I'm in schools, so I know where we're at. And guess what else I just did? I had to do an entire review of college prep programs, textbooks, and actual instruction by professors, and in a state that is embargoed so far, so I cannot release that information. But the reality is what I learned about what teachers were getting before they go into their service, that pre-service experience, was mind-blowing in the courses I reviewed. So it really taught me, like, well, how in the world would I know anything about assessment? Remember, I'm a speech language pathologist, and you probably can guess my whole 2 years post-bachelor, I was assessing children for 2 years, providing assessment, diagnostically figuring out what I needed to do, and then applying treatment. And I had somebody watching me doing it the whole time. As educators, we don't get that amazing opportunity. So I always wish for all educators to have a speech language pathology degree, because with it, you learn about all the assessments of early reading, early language. And wow, hello, that's what we need. So interestingly, we as educators didn't get those assessment in that assessment background. And that's just the nature of the beast. Handouts, they went into the chat box. If you didn't get them, let me drop them one more time if you just got on, because I can, so why not? So here we go, friends. Here we go, deep dive, help. There it is. So the deep dive is this sheet that I create mostly to extend your learning. We are only spending this hour together, but in this time, I want to inspire you, because I wouldn't be a high performance coach if I couldn't do that. So here's the deal. We have to choose to learn. And, so I made you a deep dive so you can choose to learn more, because assessment's a big topic. And so that will get you started. And here's your other one. This is the PowerPoint. My Zoom little guy is bopping all over the place. All right, so you should have the handouts if you just joined, and we're gonna keep going because this is a big PowerPoint. Okay. So ultimately, I want to be really clear. I love seeing your faces, but then I can't read my PowerPoint, so I got to shrink it all up here. Ultimately, we want to support systems and teachers in getting your first instruction right. So in order to do that, you have to have really great systems. And those systems are about the ecosystem of your classroom, how you set up your behavior and engagement processes, your systems in your room, and they include assessment. And the beginning part of that is screening. So when we want to get this done, we figure out what screening tools will get us the most information that is reliable and valid, and it will help inform us do the diagnostic prescriptive instruction that we ultimately want to provide our students with. So let's just quick review. This is going to be a quick piece. Let's be clear. I might shock you today. I promise you. I am not in the business of just being just same old, same old. I want to show you stuff you may never have seen. And I promise you, in the courses I reviewed and what I was seeing on the Facebook page, there weren't a lot of the things I'm talking about being said. So, and it's not just a little bit provocative, it's where the science of reading is. And the gap between where the scientists are and where we as educators are continues to be pretty vast. So I want to help you potentially grab onto some of this by the end of this talk, and you might be able to implement new tools as interventionists, as coaches, as leaders, as teachers, to help revolutionize your systems and assessment protocols in your schools, okay? Because why? Because learning to read is a process, and it requires us to really consider how this child is mastering a series of developmental stages in response to environmental input. So by the time a child comes to school, they've had a series of developmental stages that they've gone through: language acquisition, social emotional experiences. They have been imprinted in many, many ways prior to getting to school. There's a lot of input coming in. So that processing starts in utero. And the most amazing thing to me in our assessment protocols that I find in school districts is that we don't even ask about that. We wait for that child to get referred all the way to special ed for that school psychologist, maybe to interview the parent and say, so anything going on environmentally? Or we might do it in the MTSS referral process. But what I really, really was shocked with about 10 years ago, when we started to see the genetic linkages in word reading difficulties, otherwise known as dyslexia, you could have up to a 58% chance of heritability. And I'm not asking mom and dad about what's going on. Like, did they have any word reading problems? And we're just going to wait till third grade until they fail miserably? It's not okay, right? So I'm pretty passionate. I like to know what I can do before we even like know to do it in a school district. So when I started to see in utero, here's my provocative piece. There are researchers out there studying as soon as that baby comes out, putting them in neuroimaging, what we would call functional magnetic resonance and EEGs. They're tracking them. They now have them tracked through 6th grade. And they're now seeing, this is Nadine Gabb's work out of Harvard, that the human brain activity from birth to 6th grade, the best part is that then you do the behavioral work and you do the assessment protocols, and they go, well, for these students who had these imaging results, they also had these behavioral results, and they are able to link the matter, gray matter, white matter, neural mapping in the brain to, they can now start to see when students may have problems a lot earlier because they see patterns in the brain, okay? And here we are going, oh, let's just see if they know the alphabet in kindergarten. It's like, really? We can like look at the brain? I mean, that's how far science is going. So I'm just putting that out there because it's exciting stuff. So Jean Schald, 1983, talks about this. And now today, the very first longitudinal research mapping the human brain and reading assessment tools and language development tools from birth to 6th grade is showing us that the brains operate differently. And imagine that, because genetic correlates had already predicted that. So now put that child in an environment where they have an incredible language experience and they're exposed to the direct instruction that they need. Maybe they will not manifest with dyslexia because we did the early intervention at a time when they really, really needed it, and it changed the neural mapping in their brain versus waiting too late and it being a struggle. So pretty provocative, isn't it? So quick poll, think about it, guys. I just taught this. When do children start the process of learning to read? Think, put it in a chat box. Okay, I'm looking in the chat box. Oh, Donna's posting. Yep, in utero. Yeah, isn't that exciting? So they're getting the tone of the mother's voice. They're starting to hear the energy around them. They're feeling the energy around them, the prosodic sensitivity of that. They're hearing language. So they're hearing if you're speaking Mandarin, if you're speaking Spanish, if you're speaking Arabic, if you're speaking English. They all have different patterns, and the young fetus is absorbing and hearing, and language development and acquisition is happening. So Patricia Kuhl's work is really great around this. KUHL, cool. So there we go. When we look at assessment, one of the great things I would like to have you leave here with is just, this is a model by Hollis Scarborough. It is not a researched model. It's a model that she drew in 2001 to represent what we know, what the researchers know, what the body of evidence is showing to be part of skilled reading, right? So when I think about when I'm in a school and in very first days in a school and I'm thinking about their assessment systems, I always look at systems first. And I think, okay, so what are your assessment systems doing? Are they assessing word recognition and the skills that underlie word recognition? Are they assessing language comprehension and the skills that underlie language comprehension? And can I tweak that out? So let's just say somebody throws me a STAR assessment, and I consider the STAR, and I consider all of the manuals. I look at the statistics. I look at what they're assessing. Are they assessing the strands? That's how I go about my curiosity is always, does this assessment help me identify risk? And can it help me do diagnostic prescriptive instruction? So I will ameliorate the risk and decrease the potential for a later exacerbated reading problem, okay? So I'm always just framing it in, are my assessments assessing these things, and do I know what my assessments are doing? So I want you to start asking those questions, like, what are the assessment tools I am using and what are they assessing? You might use a phonological awareness screening test, and you say, yeah, it's assessing phonological awareness. Most likely, it's a survey measure. It's not a valid and reliable. It's just a survey. It's surveying the skills that they have, more of a mastery measurement formative type assessment. So what we're looking at when I look at phonological awareness in a tool that has validity and reliability might be phoneme segmentation fluency on a curriculum-based measurement, something you might see in Ames Web, Acadience, Dibble's 8th edition, Easy CBM. Okay, so those are highly validated, have about 4 decades of research behind them. And that's really important. You want to know that you are knowing how to assess these things. And one of the things that I love that Joe Torgerson and Rick Wagner offered the field post reading first were 2 tools. One's called the Comprehensive Test of Phonological Processes, and one's called the Test of Word Reading Efficiency. You might need to write that stuff down because I didn't put that in this PowerPoint. I'm sorry. I have a lot of knowledge and I can't always get it all on a PowerPoint. What I love about what Rick and Joe did in that time period is that they had a lot of opportunity to say, well, what do we need to know to be good at word recognition? Well, by golly, they created some assessment tools that really helped us learn about those things. The Comprehensive Test of Phonological Processing, CTOP, okay, CTOPP, and then the Tower, Test of Word Reading Efficiency, looks at how quickly the human brain fast maps what's called now orthographic mapping, sight recognition of familiar words. And that's a 45-second assessment for real words, 45-second for non-words. I love to give those in the survey level. Once I've screened kids, then I like to have some very valid, very reliable, very clear assessment tools that get me into word recognition assessment question. Yep, love those. So it's just so valuable. When I move, I get called into, well, I have the privilege, I should say, of working in grant systems that are supported first by the federal government and then by a state. And one of the things I consistently do when I move into about the 3rd, 4th year is building the assessment system out, is we make sure we have that CTOP and Tower in the position to make sure that once we do screening and survey, and then we have more diagnostic level tools. So there's some nuggets for you because we're going to go deep into language by the end of this one, because I find language is the one we're all going, what? What do we do with that? So a lot of our assessment tools do pretty good for word reading, but language is a bigger question. So skilled word reading continuum. This is not something new to you, but I hope that you can use this. Please let me know if there are any slides that you really like that you would like to use in MTSS team process or intervention. I have my teams use slides like this because when we're describing what we call sample of students, the complete sample, a normative sample, there are always 10 to 15% of our students who truly do have word reading difficulties that are significant and or we may have been able to identify through very clear instruction and assessment that they have dyslexia or severe word reading difficulty. And there's another 40 to 50% of students who need this very explicit code-based instruction. So if you add those 2 numbers up, 15 and 50, that's 65% of our students really need us to provide a very explicit systematic instruction curriculum. And the 35 plus 5, that 40 on top, 35 to 40% on top, they're going to probably get it in spite of what curriculum and what tools we use to assess. The reason I bring this continuum is I want you to think about it this way. As a speech language pathologist early in my career, everybody always would talk about the autism spectrum. And I started to think about everything on a spectrum, like, well, word reading's on a spectrum. And so I have a really good superstar reader over here. Sometimes they're hyperlexic, meaning they're great at reading, but they don't understand. And I have the average reader, proficient reader. They're just totally fine, average grade level. Below average, not so proficient, not meeting those large outcome summative assessments. They're part of that consistent group of students who are just not making it. And then I have the well below. And then within that, we always have our students that are truly hardwired for the significant difficulty, dyslexia. So that's a continuum, and it exists in every classroom. None of us are going to have only the top 40%. We're always going to have students that need us to be very clear, very diagnostic. And so, help! What tools align with the science of reading so I know exactly what to do and when to do it and why I'm doing it is really the reason I'm here today. So I'm going to look in the chat box quick. Okay, Donna's taking care of it. Great. Give me a shout out if you need to. Just turn your mics on. Pretty informal. So let's just be clear. Assessment. You know, I try to be very let's be simple, clear, and intentional. Assessment is when I'm measuring something, right? We have definitely different types of assessment. We have universal screening, we have summative, we have formative. So we have many different types of assessment. What we're talking about right now is this universal screening, and we're going to also talk about survey of skill assessment, and we could talk about mastery, measurement, and formative a little bit too. So what I love, and one of my mentors, Anita Archer, always says, you know, what we teach equals what they learn. So we want to measure what we're teaching. And one of the things I consistently learn is that our curricular tools that keep coming out, and they all want to have these assessment cycles in them, you know, the weekly assessment. And many of my schools, they get addicted to doing it like all day Friday, and then that whole day goes to, it just is gone. It's like, wait a second, we could have been teaching all day, and we chose to do the multiple choice test from the curriculum. We can mastery measure a lot more efficiently, and we work on that typically in the schools I'm in. But where I'm going with that is that, are those assessments what I really am talking about today? No. Actually, I want assessments that are measuring what they learn. And to be very clear, I usually look at assessments in curricular tools and I say, wow, this is a multiple choice question. And just by sight recognition alone, most children are getting it right. However, the children that really can't read are getting 100% on these assessments. And so I found that they were getting really high scores on their report card in reading based on these assessments. This is just recent. It happened to me in May. And I'm like, wait a second, guys, we do CBMs, we do diagnostic survey, we do the CTAP, we do the tower, and you're putting that this kid's like got a 90% reading on their report card because they did what on this multiple choice assessment that has no reliability or validity. It just is seeing if they can remember the orthographic pattern that we taught this week. Very insightful. So what I'm talking about here, we're going to get serious. This is the stuff that really measures if they've mastered what we're really teaching, and it is an actual, we can see it as a functional skill, like they're able to read, that they're able to apply, they're not just able to memorize something. So very different. So I put this into essential questions, and I'm going to have to speed up a little bit through these. I gave you a lot of information because I wanted to make sure you had it. But what I really want to bring about in this question is, what do we screen and what do we screen for? We're talking about reading, right? We could talk about math. We could talk about social emotional. We could talk about a lot of things. But right now we're talking about reading. And we also are talking about screening. Not an outcome. It's not an end of the year and not a summative. It means we're also needing to bring in the multiple risk factor model, because we want to understand, if I've taken a bit of screening information and I start to pull in all these other factors about what this child's got going on in their life, I might start to see that the risk is getting higher. So we are starting to see that with more information, meaning we as the body of evidence, the science of reading, is that there are these factors that the researchers are calling promotive factors. They're associated with better outcomes for students. And those are protective factors, are also moderators of their greatest influence in the context of heightened risk, but have limited influence by themselves. So I'm going to show you some of those things, but those are new words to introduce to the scenario, but I want you to look at this. This is what I'm talking about. These are things that build resilience and things that lend themselves to be adding to the risk, okay? Let's frame this. Got to see your faces. Let's frame this. This is what I'm saying. You have a group of students in front of you. You might have, as an interventionist, you might have up to, I don't know, some people have up to 40, 50 that you're responsible for. Or if you're the person who is ahead of the assessment, you have hundreds of children. And so you do this screening, and that's your first indication system. And your screening says, hey, we have this group of students that has risk. And then we go on and we say, all right, so what else do we need to know about these students? What other things can be adding to the risk? So the teeter-totter. Some kids have risk, but mom and dad are putting them into tutoring and they're reading to them every night, and everything is just like they're completely in wraparound care. Other kids have risk, and mom and dad have never come to school and will never be coming to school. And we don't really know a lot about what's going on. We feel like there might be something happening at home, seems to be hungry when he comes to school. Lots of, that's adding to the risk. So we take in information, but we have to understand that there's a lot more to just than the numbers, is what I'm trying to say. And this is what the research is showing. So you'll see down in the left-hand corner, I cited the research. There's some really great articles on this. You could nudge me if you were interested in reading one. So look at those risk factors that create for vulnerability. So within child factors, that's where I kind of want to know if there's some heritability in there, core cognitive processing difficulties. So if there are some phonological weaknesses, phonological working memory weaknesses, RAN, rapid automatic naming. Well, if those are core cognitive processing deficits that cause major risk, are your assessments measuring them? Question, really important one to answer. Now, that's something the CTOP measures, all of them. Okay, that's just a good example. Now, but a running record won't. Individual reading inventory won't. Level literacy won't. So when you want to align your practices to SoR, sciences, they're telling us there's some fundamental things in the reading brain that we absolutely know that when they are in a state of vulnerability, we will compound risk if we do not know that they are at a level of deficit, and we need to apply diagnostic prescriptive instruction for that child. So we have to have the assessment tools that get after that and find it. Now look at the next one, language impairment, decreased language skill. Ooh, wow. I'm a speech language pathologist, and as you heard me say, I wish all educators had the language classes that I went through. And I think it needs to be in the future. My dream is that is the foundation of all education. And that was where Louisa Moats created Language Essentials for Teachers of Reading and Spelling, letters. That is where the book Speech to Print, the essential Language Essentials for Teachers of Reading. It's an actual book and a workbook. Buy it if you don't have it. It's all about how language is a foundation of what we do. And the moral of this is that language, you might be feeling like, at least I did, like, what are we doing to assess that? And so I always scratched my head like, if language is the foundation of everything, and I'm over here assessing how many letter names they know, or if they do phoneme segmentation, or if they have letter sound fluency, or they're doing nonsense word reading fluency, what do I know about language broadly? Okay. And that would be like, the garbage was ready to be taken out. Which picture shows me that? And you show a child a picture, and there's a garbage can that's full of garbage and a garbage can that's empty. And they have to choose the one that shows the garbage is ready to be taken out. So that is a comprehensive, that's a comprehension task, language comprehension, right? So I start to think about all these risk factors, attentional, adverse environmental factors, trauma. I'm so grateful we're finally coming into a little bit more understanding about trauma. Visual problems, not just poor eyesight, okay? There are other things that can underlie, it's a very small percentage, but non-scientifically informed early reading instruction. We could have a second grader who had very misinformed early instruction that has very poor reading skills, but it's a serious risk factor, but it doesn't mean they'll go on to be a poor reader. Let's read that box up in the left. Causes are no longer considered deterministic, but are conceived of as risk factors. So sure, I had some poor reading instruction, but it doesn't mean it determines the rest of the child's life. Sure, I have a little language impairment, but it doesn't mean it determines the rest of my life. I love what Pennington says in this. None of the associated deficits is sufficient or necessary to lead to word reading difficulties. So we can no longer say, oh, well, wow, they have all this going on, therefore they'll just be a poor word reader. And no, that's an adult problem. We didn't figure it out. Okay, that's basically what that quote says. So that is powerful to me. That's why it's on this slide. I will be glad to give you this in a larger format. I love using this at referral team meetings, MTSS team meetings. Like, let's go through the risk. Have we ruled all these things? Let's make sure we go through the promotive factors. So supportive family, do we know early identification? Do we know if we're providing explicit systematic structured literacy? Do we know what their language skills? Do we know what their task-focused behavior? How motivated are they? Do they have average intelligence, adaptive coping strategies, extra time? You see what I'm saying? So if you go through these as like a, wow, this could help really build resiliency, and this over here will compound risk. We want to know these things, okay? So there you go. Let me know if you need that handout. I just put a nice definition of dyslexia. It's in your handout. This is from a recent article by Hugh Katz and Yakov Petcher, Florida Center for Reading researchers. And, you know, it's just an honest statement. I think that most researchers, clinicians, and educators agree that the primary characteristic of dyslexia is severe and persistent difficulty learning to read and spell, okay? Words, despite adequate opportunity instruction, there is also agreement that children must have adequate vision and hearing acuity, whereas the adequacy of verbal and or nonverbal intellectual abilities is still under debate. So I love that we can say that we're continuing to grow. The research body is still continuing to grow even around this. But I think the big takeaway here is when a student has severe word reading difficulties and they're persistent in nature, what I see often in the hundreds of students I've now been working with, and great interventionists and leaders, is that when we have a student who's been exposed to poor instruction, and they're not dyslexic, they will pop right up in the data. We're like, boom, just gave them the right instruction and everything, just boom. And then we have the student who pops up a little, and we have to apply a lot. They're persistently poor responders. And then we really start to learn who our significant slow responders are. So if you're a teacher, you know what I'm talking about. So I wanted to give you a little bit of new information. I don't know how, I want to see in the chat box. Let me see, okay, lots going on. Okay, everybody, in the chat box, how many of you talk about DLD, developmental language disorder? When you talk in referral, anything, just be honest. I just kind of want to no, we never talk about it. Yes, it's like one of the main things we talk about. Give me some, okay, no, okay. I love it. Thanks for your honesty, everyone. All right. I love it. You know, it's very unknown, right? It's just crazy. So here's the deal, guys. Did you know that this is one of the most prevalent, second to word reading, disabilities. Like, that's crazy. And I feel like we're kept in the dark about it. And it is something that, as a speech language pathologist early in my career, I would go into, and I'm like, well, that's a language problem. And teachers are like, I don't really know. Nobody talks about language. And that's when I was young. And I'm like, I don't understand. What do you mean? Because, I had to study for like 6 years in language, linguistics and everything. And so it's okay. This is when I learned educators very rarely took a linguistics course, did not take language acquisition and development and disorders. And so here we are. Guess what? A large percentage of, students have developmental language disorders. I'm so passionate about it that I'm hosting a really amazing conference in a month, and an entire strand for 3 days will have the researchers from Oxford to Massachusetts General speaking on how language is the foundation of reading and how we can assess it early. So I'm going to leave you with some of those nuggets in this talk. So developmental language disorder is brain difference for real, and it makes talking and listening difficult. So I've given you all the talking points. Okay, your handout is very clear on this. It's associated with risk for dyslexia and other learning disabilities. I think Hugh Katz, when I was listening to him, it's in your deep dive, says that of those in the clinical population that have dyslexia, another 35%, of them, those that have dyslexia, 35% of them have developmental language disorder as well. Okay. So of those students in your classrooms, which are 5 to 20% who have significant word reading difficulties, up to 35% of them also have developmental language disorders. Okay. So that's normal sampling. We're humans. We're just part of this normal sample. Some of us have really big feet and some of us don't. And that's, some of us have word reading difficulties and some of us have language just processing differences, and it's okay. We're all okay. We're just different. And learning about how to assess that and then teach it is what we're here for. So affects 2 out of every classroom. It's a big deal. So I just really want to bring that to light. And here's some more information on it. Here's the similarities and differences. Both last a lifetime. There are no cures. Both are prevalent in every classroom, 5 to 20%. Of those that have dyslexia, there's that number, 30% have DLD too. So 50, so it's not 35, it's 30. Greatest allies in schools are informed teachers and systems, because I'll be honest, at Bush, Alaska for 8 years, a lot of our language impaired students would become behavioral difficulties, because when you can't do things or when you don't understand things and you're really the room is not scaffolded to support you, you start to just, your growth mindset disappears, and the grit does too. So this is where being very clear and systematic, explicit instruction. The last point I want to make here is that people with DLD have trouble understanding and using the language. That's very different than those who have dyslexia, because they're having a problem with reading and also understanding, but the dyslexic alone has the word reading difficulty. Okay, makes sense. So if you have that student who's like the persistently poor word reader, also not understanding, that's probably DLD comorbidity. Make sense? Okay. So how am I going to screen this? So what we're doing is we're looking for risk indication, and then we have to do something. There's assessment without doing something. Just don't even do it. You're wasting everyone's time. So really, use that data, and if it's not good data, do something else, get better data. So making sure I'm in the chat box, is DLD diagnosed by SLPs? Or yes. So Linda, DLD would be a speech language pathologist. Okay, so just to be clear on that. And
except I want to make a comment about that. In my 45 years of working, I have never had anyone say a word about DLD, especially a speech and language pathologist. So,
Well, they changed the name just a few years ago. It used to be specific language impairment, SLI. So categorically, y'all might have heard of it as something different. And then there was this little debate in the speech and language world. And so you can go to DLD and me. I put it on your deep dive sheet. There's some good links on there, okay? And oh my gosh, Lola, I just recognized you out there. I'm so happy to see your face. Hi, friend. So, DLD, it's just this like mystery thing, and it's not okay. So
what about auditory processing disorder? Is that the same?
No, not the same. So also part of the realm of that speech language pathologist and neuropsych. So just not the same though, but very tricky and debated in the field as well. So yeah, keeping it real for sure. I wouldn't be honest with myself if I didn't challenge you in this, because aligning our assessment practices with the science of reading doesn't mean we just go out and do a quick little CBM. It's like I have to assess the entire reading brain, and the reading rope shows me all these strands that are instructionally important. So how do I assess those things? And so, well, if I have to assess language, well, by golly, what are the difficulties in language? And if the most prevalent difficulty in language is developmental language disorder, and it affects about 2 kids in every classroom, then why aren't we talking about it, right? So I just would love to keep people being more aware of it. So there you go, just some more facts. You can read them all in your handout. So just to recap all of that, what is being screened? We're really screening foundational skills and knowledge, ultimately. Even if you're a 5th grade teacher and you have students who are coming to you who have cognitive skills that are let's just say they're not mapping speech to print, and you seem to find that there's some error patterns in how they segment. They're missing syllables. They're dropping phonemes. That would go all the way back to a phonological difficulty. Okay, but in a 5th grade assessment, you might not have that phonological piece of the assessment. So you have to bring the right tools in to be able to do that. Okay. So you're assessing knowledge, like let's say in a 5th grader, let's do that again. Oftentimes we're looking at a lot of standards, like, do they know this knowledge? And when we're looking at reading skill, we're looking at a lot of application of their strategy and how they're reading and writing. But if they're struggling readers, we're looking at how the reading brain is processing information. So that would be looking at their phonological development, their phonics skills, their sight reading, okay, all of that. And it's so much different if they're a kindergartner. You're like, oh, that's easy. Do you know 26 letters? Do you know 26 letters names? And you might show up and be like, this is an absolute true story. I was given a school that had 0% proficiency, K-12 in Bush, Alaska. And they said, Danielle, could you go in and figure out what's going on? I did a K-12 assessment, and I asked every student to tell me what the letters of the alphabet were. And through 12th grade, I consistently had students who could not tell me the alphabet letters. So that's when I realized they didn't even know the alphabet. And here I was assessing them on a statewide standards-based assessment, and the students didn't even know the alphabet. So it was pretty monumental in my career. It really shook me up and changed how I just took it back down to base level. And I give all credit to Ken Apple. He actually counseled me at a scientific studies in reading event on how I could just quickly assess all children and kind of get a bigger picture of what was going on in the school. So anyway, I wrote a sentence. What he told me to do is have students count how many words are in a sentence, which one was the compound word. It had the word cowboy in it. 75% of them could do it. 25% couldn't. And that was in the high school. So pretty informative on simple things like just the structure of the English language that I wouldn't have just pulled out of my head at the time. So we're trying to find risk indication, guys. That's what we're doing. Why are we doing it? Because we want teachers, we want grade level teams in PLC process, literacy leaders, MTSS teachers, any team that is discussing data to have valid and reliable data that helps you understand if what you're doing equals what they're learning and what they need to be learning. Okay. Any questions? Comment in the chat box. Okay. So I'm going to go quicker through this piece. So the question was, sorry, going the wrong way, systems and statistics. So of course you need systems. Actually, the work I primarily do, I'm a little obsessed with systems and overhauling systems and making sure that the systems are working for the teachers and the students, because we might think we have systems, but they're not always working. And our idea of what MTSS is, multi-tiered systems of support, and that equitability within it, it's not always there. So I always start there. Like, what are our systems doing? And do we have an assessment system that's valid and reliable? So MTSS system, what does your core instruction look like? What tools are you using? What is your assessment system? So if I want to do like, I got to have the right assessment tools. Well, yeah, you could have great assessment tools, but then you could have the worst systems, the worst curriculum, and teacher knowledge that isn't able to apply the knowledge you get from the assessment system. So you got to do it all. You got to do systems, which is MTSS, leadership, and assessment. You have to do literacy, leadership, coaching, and teacher knowledge. There's 4 pillars of change in this. So that's just a quick takeaway on that. Why do we use assessments to inform instruction, and will good instruction also inform us? So I'm using a quote from Farrell and Ashby here. In the hands of skilled literacy, structured literacy teachers, well-taken data supports unbiased, timely educational decision making and thereby improves student outcomes. So yeah, if you're teaching and you're constantly taking data, you know if what you're teaching is changing the reading brain. You will know that. It's just very timely. It's mastery measurement. You're doing lots of dictation processes. You're just really getting a lot of students in the flow state. Flow state is when what they know is efficient and they're able to say it, able to read it, able to write it. And you can just see that in a classroom. So now, sure, I hope it shows up on all the screening tools as well. But those screening tools are really just like the thermometer. Are we at 98.6? Yay, we're almost there. Or we've surpassed it. Yes. So what kind of tools do you need to have to know that you're on track? This is a link. It's in your handout. Okay. I'm not going to go through it. But I am going to say one thing is so important. I work with Native Americans, Native Alaskans, children who have what we would call a dense dialect, African American. They have dialectical variations, and the denser the dialect, we have different outcomes in assessments. So those are all very important considerations, which is why you should consider your population. Okay. And that's a whole nother dial. Look at Julie Washington's stuff. Okay. Julie Washington is really going down that path of helping us understand dialect density, variation, and what that means. She's actually just done some great work with some subtests of language tests and found that children who have very, very dense dialects cannot differentiate, like she run fast versus she ran fast. That there was they couldn't tell that was a wrong verb. So that's a very important thing, because on the told, you're supposed to be able to tell that it's not correct syntax. And that helps people know that you have developed language appropriately. However, if you have a dense dialect of a different dialect of English, it's just different. You might not think that that's wrong. And so the test might say that you don't know something, but that's not true. So anyway, that's what number one's all about, really making sure you're attuned to who your kids are. So where can we get access to the handouts? Oh, they were I dropped them in. Donna will email them.
Yep.
Okay, so what systems do we need? Quickly, basically, we need systems. You need an MTSS. We need statistics. If you didn't notice, there the numbers are. Okay, this is the woo, woo, woo. Pay attention to this one, okay? 0.8, 0.9, I promise you, that's something I do right away. Remember how I said, here's Scarborough's rope. I'm going into a district. They say, oh, we're using this assessment. Oh, we're using this assessment. Oh, and we use this assessment. And then what I do is I pull out the manuals and I go look for those numbers. Sometimes I find that those numbers are like 0.62. And I'm like, that one doesn't have the reliability it needs to have. So I ask you to be curious. I ask you to have no judgment about the assessments or the habits you may already have. Just be curious about them and say, well, maybe this thing that I've been doing a long time, I don't even know if it's reliable or valid. Just go question that, okay? And your formative mastery measurement, you won't be able to measure that, but all of your screening tools, all of your diagnostic tools like the CTOP, the tower, all of those will have numbers, okay? And the CTOP and the tower will have a 0.92, just like the Woodcock-Johnson. Most of those assessments are really high. Most of your screeners will range from, like, depending on the grade level, 0.76 to like 0.95. It just depends on the screener. Okay. The new one that I'm going to put at the end of this talk, OCSED language screen, it's just getting validated in the US in a school that I'm working in. It is clocking out at a 0.95 prediction of DLD. Is that not exciting? Starting at age 3.5, 3.5 years of age in England and Australia, they're finding that it's predicting developmental language disorder at a 0.95 reliability, and one's perfect. So that's pretty amazing. So give you a little insight into that. Okay, next question. So if we could normalize up to 92% of the students, which is what the research is consistently showing us in K-1 classrooms, with resources and knowledge based in the science of reading, how do we find the students who are at risk for reading difficulties? So, I mean, give me some feedback in the chat box. How many of you are in systems where the first data point you get is in kindergarten? Remember, it starts at birth, like pre-K, okay? What else? Where's your first data point? Kindergarten, okay. So I'm going to, all the tools that I'm, the new stuff I'm going to be showing you, it allows you to say, okay, if development starts in neural tube, and like there's a lot of stuff happening before 5 years of age, and our first data point happens at kindergarten, how are we going to make sure we normalize up to 92% of them if we never even found them before the age of 5? So we all know that there's this thing called the federal law on child find. So if we could find children sooner, what we're trying to do in a district that I'm working in Montana, is we're trying to child find, sure, we're finding really what we call the low incidence disabilities, which is really high need, not the high incidence disability, which would be DLD and word reading difficulties. So what we're trying to do though is at least screen them so that we can provide evidence for why we need more robust early learning environments, because in Montana, we don't fund early learning environments. So we want our communities to, we want to show them there's a need. We want to make sure, because the data is all here. We know that we need to do it, and we know that we need to do it earlier so we can normalize them. So in another district, colleague Lola is on the line today, we have implemented tools down to 4 years of age. And it's amazing to see that the preschool teachers in that school district basically out-taught kindergarten first grades. The kids leaving preschool they have so many more skills than they'd ever had before, the teachers said, because they had the data to show them what to do. It's so powerful. Okay. So we got to change those trajectories, because here's why. Let me get that clear. You can normalize up to 92% of the students. That means they will be typical by the time they leave first grade. If you do not normalize them by the time they leave first grade, they have an 88% chance of always being below grade level. 88% chance. So we want to normalize them by the end of first grade. We want to find them very early. Okay. So frameworks just help us organize our thinking. They're human made, but they're the best things we have to say, well, what do you think is happening when the reading brain has to read? Well, it's got to read words, and then, hey, it's got to comprehend them. So that's where the simple view of reading comes in. It said, hey, got to decode the words, and we got to understand them, language comprehension, and then it's a product of these two things. And that's super complex, actually. There's a new model called the DEAR model. It's so amazing on the simple view of reading. And it's super complex, but this is my favorite part. I'm also willing to share this. It's called my mixer knob slide. Lots of people ask for this. I will do a mixer knob for a specific student, and I'll say, give me your data, and here's what we know. So I will say, what do we know about phonological skills that underlie decoding? What do I know about word reading skills? That would be nonsense word, real word, sight word, high frequency. What does their spelling look like? All of those things underlie decoding. What is their vocabulary, which also contributes to better decoding? What is their oral language, receptive, expressive? What's their verbal reasoning? Do we know, what can you tell me about social skills? What can you tell me about rapid automatic naming or on-task behavior? Do we have any history? Do we have any speech and language therapy history? Was the child in early identification? I can ask a lot of questions, and then create a mixer knob, and that orange line is typical. That's average. So this student that I created had all below average cognitive skills that contribute to decoding. Okay. So then I was like, this is a word reading kid. Pretty good language, pretty good social skills, good RAN, great on-task behavior, but was not reading very well. Okay. So this is my mixer knob for simple view of reading. Like, these are the skills that we're measuring, or that we should be measuring, based on Scarborough's reading rope and the simple view of reading. So what do they look like in reality? Are they above average or below average? And what are we going to do about it? Or do I need more information? Another way of looking at all this, I put the bottom, you can see heritability, adverse. I put a few things on there. So here we go. Screening as we know it. We're either doing CBMs or we're doing CAT assessment, or if you're not doing any of those, you might need to be doing one of those. I'll tell you that much right now. Curriculum-based measurement's been around for over 4 decades. Computer adaptive testing has been around pretty much since computers developed the item response theory, so that you can if you get an item correct, it gives you a harder item. If you get an item wrong, it gives you an easier item. And interestingly, not all are inclusive of language assessment. Okay, so they're most often they're adapted to assessing if students are making progress towards standards, so they can predict if students are going to pass state outcome measures. That would be more of the computer adaptive. Then there's the early literacy computer adaptive tools. Really look into their reliability and validity. That 0.8 number, you'll find some of those computer adaptive early literacy screeners just don't have the numbers, and they're starting. It's not published yet, but I know it because I talked to the researchers. They're starting to find that a lot of these actually do not predict at the level companies told people. So hence why you might not be finding the kids. They just are not that sensitive, is what we call that. They're just not sensitive to, because if you sit and watch a kindergartner on a computer adaptive assessment and they're supposed to be doing some phonemic task and they're just click happy or something, and you're like, yeah, no, that's not really reliable there, is it? You'll be honest with yourself then. When you watch the kid take it, you're like, okay, yeah, no wonder that's not reliable. And no wonder I can't use that assessment, right? So some assessments like to be the multi-tool. They like to say, we got everything. We got social and emotional. We got the CBMs. We got the standards-based. We've got it all. We've got progress monitoring. And then you're like, okay, do you do it all really well? Some of them just do one thing really well. Some of them like to tell you they do it all well. So ask questions. And if you have something, go dig it up and be like, what's this really doing well? So I know that I've learned so much. You could probably ask me about any assessment out there, and I could probably have a very clear answer for you if it works, if it doesn't work, if it's wasting your time. Because in practicality, I want you to find your kids that need your help as soon as possible. I don't want to waste anybody's time, so that you can get into PLC process and jam it out. But if you can't do that because your assessments aren't giving you the data that you need, it's just like, it's worthless. So it's wasting your time. Okay. And you need data that matters. So we have a lot of potential in screeners. We have a lot of potential because the scientists are pushing new boundaries because we finally have enough evidence that says when we know these things about 2-year-olds, we can predict this. As one of my researchers, not mine, research colleagues, she's in her 70s now. She's going to be speaking at the summit on a through line of 2 years old to 30 years old. What she now knows about a 2-year-old and social, emotional, and language development, and what they are finding at 30. And she's like, it is so hard and fast and so consistent. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And we're still not assessing children, right? Our pediatricians are like, well, maybe you should wait. I think they'll be fine. And that is the average response from a pediatrician still. I just heard that the other day as well. So here you go. Consider what you can do to find children as early as possible is all I'm going to say. Okay, I'm going to give you a lot of solutions. Use the tools that are built for early screening because they really matter. And I'll be clear with which ones don't, okay? So what are some of the examples of line tools? Let's consider a few. CBMs, there's one. How many of you use CBMs? Pop it in the chat box. Curriculum-based measurement. It might be a Cadence. It might be Dibble's 8th edition. It might be AIMSweb. It might be Easy CBM. It might be STAR, BATA, battery of CBMs. Any of you have CBMs that you're using consistently? Yes, yes, yes. Okay, good. If you don't have CBMs, you might want to get some. Dibble's 7th edition is a Cadence, okay? A Cadence and Dibble's 7th edition are the same thing. Dibble's 8th edition had a little divorce with Dibble's 7th, and they went over to the University of Oregon, and these guys became a Cadence. And a Cadence got to keep the 40 years of data, okay? And you can still take the 7th edition. They're still available for free. Why? Because they were developed under a federal government grant. And so if you print them all out, you can still access them. So if you've never done one, I would get your hands on one and try one, okay? Because they are really, they're a 1-minute timed, the human brain, when it knows something and it's in flow state, it does something very efficiently. When children do not do things efficiently, it might mean that we haven't taught them the information, or B, compared to all of their peers, they're the one student who really doesn't do things efficiently. There might be something else going on, which gives you risk indication, okay? So a timed assessment, untimed assessment, there's value in both of them. So that's one of the nuggets of a CBM. Here's what CBMs measure. This is kind of a complicated infographic that I created, but that's a simple view of reading. It takes word reading times language to get to reading comprehension. Here are the skills we teach. We teach phonemic awareness, phonics, accurate and fluent connected text reading. In that, advanced phonics, word attack skills, okay? And then we also teach the language comprehension side of all of that, okay? Vocabulary and text comprehension. But when we use CBMs, these are our indication systems. So the first, kindergarten, rapid automatic naming. Good rapid automatic naming tends to be a really positive indicator. So now good CBM protocols have rapid automatic naming in them, okay? I put ISF, initial sound fluency. I think it's called, I always get it wrong, first sound fluency, phoneme segmentation fluency. This is Dibble's 7th edition, letter naming fluency, nonsense word fluency, correct letter sounds, nonsense word fluency, whole words read, ORF for accuracy, ORF for fluency, and then reading maze. So the arrows in the bottom are all when they have the prediction power. So like at the end of kindergarten, if you're good at nonsense word correct letter sounds, it's a strong prediction that you'll be a good reader in 2nd grade. Okay. So if you have whole words read and you have ORF fluency at the end and accuracy, at the end of 1st grade, that's a strong predictor that you will have an 88% chance of staying on grade level. But if not, you won't. Okay, so really powerful stuff. This is all from a CBM protocol. Okay, very highly predictive of later success, very informative of who's at risk, who's not at risk. Does it tell me exactly how to teach a kid in a small group? No, I'm going to do more assessment after this. But I want to show you another assessment tool quick on the simple view of reading. This is a new assessment tool. It goes now down to 4 years of age up through 1st grade. It's called Early Bird. It comes out of the same lab, Nadine Gabb, who's doing the brain research from birth to 6th grade. Early Bird is an iPad tool. I had the privilege of working with it in Wisconsin, and I had the privilege of also doing the part of the validation study. I have no affiliation with it. I'm not telling you to buy it. I certainly am not. I am telling you, I'm showing you what assessment tools can do. If you are assessing the reading rope, remember the very beginning, I said, let's look at the whole reading rope. What are the things I should be assessing? In that, you're assessing the strands of decoding, you're assessing the strands of language comprehension. I look at Early Bird and I say, wow, it's assessing the phonemic strand through rhyming, blending, deleting, first sound matching, and nonsense word repetition. And remember, it's 4 years old, 5 years old, 6 years. So it's doing pre-reading. It's doing the skills pre-reading. And then it's going to letter name, letter sound. Those are the alphabetic. And then it goes to actual potential for word reading. It has a CBC structure in it. And then look at all of the language things it's screening for a 4, 5, and 6-year-old. Vocabulary pairs, oral sentence comprehension, and following directions. And also, it has RAN. So it pretty much covered the entire reading rope. And this is an assessment tool I can do on an iPad, okay? It was brand new last year. So the power of knowing things is that we can do something different, right? This is very different than doing leveled literacy. That's where I'm going to take you right now, because this is a B level B2 book. Both children were considered below benchmark when they started because they were assessed at a B2 level. Then we looked deeper into their profiles using Early Bird. So they said, they're a B2 level book. And then Early Bird did the whole assessment, like 20 minutes long. And Samantha over here, look at her profile. It shows us that on RAN, she's in the 24th percentile. There's some risk there. Letter naming, she's at the 39th percentile. Letter sound, she's at the 20th percentile. They're both in the same B2 book. They both got leveled the same. They're both like treated the same. But on Early Bird, when you look at their data, Samantha and Jason are not the same. They're very different. Their brain is processing information differently. And that is what the newer assessment tools do. And we as teachers could have never measured that on a leveled assessment, a running record, a IRI. None of that can tell us this stuff. Okay? So we need to go deeper and we need to know more about our students. And you'll see that Jason, his struggle was with phonological awareness. And if we know anything about the science of reading, it's taught us that most word reading difficulties go back to phonological weaknesses. Okay, so Samantha's pretty strong phonologically and her oral vocabulary is pretty strong, but Jason, his is not. Let's go look at another kid. And this is up close, okay? I like this next one though. This is a classic one that I experienced. The F10 kid in kindergarten. And I'd be like, all right, super. Look at her RAND, 87th percentile, letter name, 99th, 99th. Look at her vocabulary, 99th, 89th, 79th, 99th. This kid's parents probably read to this child from the time they got pregnant, and it just has great language skills, great vocabulary, great talking skills, really interactive. And then what is super fascinating is because this child probably knows that first letter because their letter name is really strong and letter sound, they make a lot of guesses about the words that are in the book because that is what strong vocabulary can do for you. But does that mean that child knows how to read every word in that book? No, it doesn't. In fact, phonological skills are not very good. And so this student might go on to be a dyslexic at the end of the day. Strong oral language skills, not a developmental language impaired child. A dyslexic though, and you would never know it in kindergarten based on a level because their vocabulary and overall demeanor and everything about that child, like, oh my gosh, they love books. They're just so strong in their vocabulary, can talk all day long. But wow, we never knew anything about their phonological skills. And through this assessment, you learn more about those things. Pretty powerful, isn't it? It's very humbling. So here we go. To finish it up, other universal screeners, you can look at a prize. This one's coming out of Fumiko Haif's lab, UConn, pretty powerful. I think it goes into production at this fall. It's looking at different indicators. It needs to be used in collaboration with something like a CBM. And I also recommend that with Earlybird. I like to use Earlybird with an Acadience CBM tool because it doesn't have progress monitoring. It's a great universal 3 times a year. New York is considering implementing Earlybird and Acadience. They already use Acadience because remember, New York's governor is dyslexic, so they're doing a lot of changes, and this is one of the things that they're considering. So here's another one. This one comes from the Test of Integrated Language and Literacy. They have a screener within it called the Student Language Scale. Let's just get clear. Everything I'm showing you has a language component to it. This one has early literacy, Earlybird does. This one has attentional and early literacy. It has look at the goals, measure a set of cognitive executive functioning skills, response time, working memory, processing speed, nonverbal IQ. It's a little bit different because we have other indicators that predict reading difficulties. And then this one is a language. So look at the ages. It's 6 to 18. It's not as young. It doesn't go down as far as Earlybird. This is the new one that I'm trying at a school in Montana. Really powerful. So this is called Language Screen, the one that has the 0.95 prediction, and it's just looking at developmental language differences, disorders, okay? It doesn't have the pre-literacy indication systems in it. So universal screeners, you know, are all our universal screeners all we use? No, you should go on and use phonological development surveys, alphabet knowledge, phonics development. That would be a phonics survey or decoding survey, spelling inventories. You get the point. These are universal screeners, screen the risk, help us understand who needs us to do more, gets very clear. Then we group with diagnostic survey data. So then go on. Are there some tools that have no evidence, or I should have put little evidence, and I gave you a few here because I've written documents about this too. I've actually searched the manuals for the evidence. So if you're curious in any of that, I could give you some of that too. So just be conscientious of sometimes what I think, and it's true in my early career, what I did out of habit, because that's what somebody taught me. I didn't even know the difference. I didn't know if it had reliability or validity. I did it because it's what my school did. Very different than asking and being curious. So I know we're running short on time. What I want you to, at the end of the day, consider is when you align your tools to SoR, really go back to checking on, are they assessing the things that we need to have assessed? Like really look at the reading rope and think about the simple view of reading. What does it take to read? Are we assessing those things, or are we leaving it to chance? So just be clear in this process. When you change your systems, when we are surrounded by environments and systems that are familiar, we tend to do what we have always done. So if some of this looked uncomfortable, like, I don't know anything about language, I'm encouraging you to not do what you've always done. I'm giving you outside of the box options, which is why I gave you all these ones that had language in them, so you could go outside that box. Even when taught to rethink or question our answers, humans tend to stick with what they're comfortable with. This is fascinating to me too. Like I had a team of teachers that were all doing like CBM tools, and then they were still doing leveling. And I'm like, why are we leveling them? Because they actually can't read that F10 book because we have a phonological issue and they can't actually decode the words. So we're going to be using decodable text, and we're going to move into leveled books when those books become accessible to that reader. We want all books. We just have to start to understand when they become applicable to that developmental stage or where that child's at. So overdoing assessment for just because it's something we're comfortable with isn't a good enough answer. Okay. So this is about getting it right. It's not about being right. And that's one of the things I say a lot. Brene Brown has taught me that again and again. Okay. And I think that's about it. I gave you a little checklist. It's on the bottom of your deep dive for you to go through and think about your systems. What tools you have, are they meeting those specifications? Do you have evidence-based instruction in place? Because without you got to do something once you get the data, and making sure your staff, colleagues have the opportunity to study this. It's hard. It's not easy. So hopefully I've given you a few answers. There's a lot of links, a lot of deep diving. So give me some questions if you have any before we sign off.
We all got our money's worth, that's for sure.
Well, that's good.
Oh, the mixer knob.
Oh yeah, mixer knob slide. I can quickly, I have that somewhere, and I can just send it to Donna and she can give it to you. It's a great way to go through referral process meetings or SST meetings, whatever you call them, just to put all your data on the table and say, let's move that mixer knob here. Let's move that mixer knob here. Oh, wow, we have really high language skills, really low. Sometimes you find that the student has socially, I'll give you my newest update. There's social emotional on it. There's anxiety on it, all of that, because those comorbid conditions can really exacerbate a reading problem. Any other questions?
Yeah. Nell, I had been at one of your other talks on assessment, and it was so inspirational that you had indicated that you had given this kind of quiz to all your teachers in your area, just to see what their knowledge base was on the science of reading. Do you give that assessment out? Is there any way that we can get that to maybe open that up as a mix, or just to see where their knowledge is on it? Because everybody's on a different page, or not at all. They've not even, in some of these districts, they are not where you guys are at. And, I'm in the state of Washington. We have legislation that we have to have everything up and running by a certain date, 2028. Our district, some of our teachers have never, as you know, are not getting at the university level, have no idea, would be mortified, or, just at a loss, speechless to say, I just wasn't taught that. And now we have all this amazing stuff out there that has been going on for years, decades of research. And just having that little questionnaire of, do you know what phonological processing is? And, all of that basic. And then you really find out there's missing pieces in your systems at the very basic level for the teachers.
Well, fundamentally, actually, we have a colleague on here who's taken that survey. The one, Lola, you took is hard, the MTSU Educator Knowledge Survey. I put it in the chat box for you, MTSU Educator Knowledge Survey. I think my email is on my handouts, but here it is again. You can write me. I can link you with they're actually collecting data still, Tim Odegaard and Emily Ferris. So you can, all my new school districts, they took it in May. And it's been super fascinating. We had one school district, I have never had this happen, where the actual staff that, you're gonna love this one, Catherine. The actual staff that are not the teachers tested higher than the teachers. Mm-hmm. And it was humbling, like super humbling, because it means that the people that are not the teachers, my opinion here, seem to be taking in the information of needing to teach children to read because they're the ones doing the interventions or the small groups, and they're really, it's probably at they have more intention or more focus or more clarity, and they're very like, okay, this is exactly what I have to do, this is the exact curriculum I have to teach, and they're learning from doing, is what I think is happening in their case, because I know the curriculums they're using that are very polar opposite than the curriculums the teachers are using.
And I think you would also add to that, you have kids who are blessed to have advocates in their lives, whether it's a parent or a tutor or whomever that is, that has gone the distance to seek out the information because it's there, and it is so important that we reach these kids. And that, you don't want any of these kids left behind. You get tired of saying that, but just the fact that, you just want all this information to just be absorbed in every teacher, every district, and not to feel that that you've missed out or done something wrong. It's just, you haven't had the information. And it's not getting to you. The state of Washington we have a dyslexia site that's been up since 2011. And if you went to most of the districts and the teachers within the state of Washington, they would say, what? We don't even acknowledge that. And so it's coming around and slow, but you guys have just been among one of the, the other states that are on the cutting edge of just saying, we're going to do this and we're going to go now. And
I wish. No, Montana is not. We've had,
but where you guys are
close to $1 billion of funding, and the NAEP scores haven't really changed in 20 years. And so that was when I created the Reading League. They decided to go through the hoops to make sure we had the Reading League Montana. That was one of my passionate, like, you need to have a why, as Simon Sinek says. You need to know why you're doing the work. And when I saw that the data hadn't changed for so long, and there's so much, there's like a $51 million grant happening right now in my home state. And just had a person talk to me today. They're coming to the summit, and they wrote me this big email, and they said, I was just in classrooms in May, and they're applying the science of reading, but they don't do this, and this. And they're like really blatant things. And she goes, how do you miss it if you get like this much money and this much support? And I'm like, I don't know how we miss it. I'm still confused, which is why I've decided to be on a mission to educate and be of service and give back and to give my knowledge. And I want you to hear something that I was thinking about setting intentions for this, is that I just had a researcher tell me the other day that there's this assessment out there, Lola, you might know this one, that actually they're finding has very poor prediction statistics, and it's a computer adaptive assessment, but it's very popular. Lots of people buy it. And I was like, I kind of knew that like 10 years ago, but because I'm just the little old me going into the school, I finally have the confidence when I really get serious about looking at the data I've also done research. So I look at the data now, and I look at what I'm seeing children doing, and then I'm looking at trends in data, and I'm quick to pivot. I don't need 10 years of evidence to say, oh, that one doesn't do well, it doesn't work. Like right now with Early Bird, it doesn't have progress monitoring. So right away with my district in Wisconsin, I'm like, we got to have Acadians too. We got to have progress monitoring. We got to have teachers having really quick detailed information. So because I've learned a lot in the field, and I want to bring it to life for teachers in a meaningful way. So keep doing the work, keep bringing the information. And Washington just came on board with the Reading League too. So
oh no, there's a lot of movement. I mean, it's happening. It's just, you want it to snap and be done, because years are going to go by. And the hard part is when you have states that are working towards this, and there's states, not necessarily whole states, but people who are getting it. We're trying to reinvent the wheel instead of just saying what's
for 20 years.
Yeah, exactly. And no one knew that there was even a national reading panel for 20 years. I mean, 20 years had gone by, and in the 2020 is 20 years, and all this research and information that has come to, that's been out there are not getting in the hands of the people that are actually needed, boots on the ground.
And then here I am showing you all these new things about language, and you're all telling me you had never seen it or heard it. So, I mean, here you're the chosen or the select few who showed up, and there's still more to learn. It's so humbling, isn't it? Just to remind ourselves that we just have to keep that really humble attitude of being a servant, and knowing that this work is really, at the end of the day, when we change this trajectory for a child early enough and normalize 92% of them by first grade, we will change the world. Like, this is a big deal. So keep that in mind. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Thanks for staying on. Donna, were there any questions on the side chat that you?
Someone wanted. Do you have a list of what assessments are good for older students versus younger students?
So, when I went through the assessments for the State Department of Montana, it's actually called the Office of Public Instruction. It was interesting because their law just basically said we accept that dyslexia is real, is pretty much all the Montana law says. It doesn't say you need to do anything about it. But and then it said that you should use an assessment tool that could screen phonology. Doesn't say anything else. When I did that to answer this question, I found that we had deep dialogues, my colleagues and I did, about what assessment tools should be used for older students. Because if the law said we had to screen phonology, you couldn't just go forth and say, oh, I'm using NWEA. We had to go forth and figure out how to, so we incorporated CBMs through, like Acadience goes through 9th grade now, I think. So we made sure we had a word reading screening tool as part of it, as well as a computer adaptive tool, because what we would see is that students would flag a little bit off in the computer adaptive, but we couldn't discreetly say what was wrong. So we had to do a word reading. And then once we got a flag in word reading, we were able to go to phonology. And so usually it's a 3 assessment protocol for the older students. You do the bigger CAT assessment. I do blanket any child below the 50th percentile on a CAT assessment. I do curriculum-based measurement. Lola got to go through this protocol this year. And you still miss some kids. You're still so we also incorporate spelling assessment. You will find interesting nuances by doing developmental spelling assessments in 5th grade, decoding word reading assessments, and then the tool they had was STAR. So we had these STAR, anything below 50th, we do decoding survey, which is the word reading and Acadience, and then they get the spelling. Any of those kids that were flagging even more, they got decoding surveys and phonological surveys. So it just was like backward chaining, always starting at the computer adaptive though. So are there good ones? I just hope you're doing one of them. NWEA, STAR are the 2 that are most used. And right now the research is coming in on those. So I can't say I'm like, yay on any of these big assessments. So Tim Odegaard has got that research coming in out of the state of Alabama. So hopefully that makes sense. It's not just you can't, because those big assessments for older students, you guys, you got to understand this. They're predicting outcomes on standards, and they're predicting the outcome on the state assessment. They are not measuring if this brain is reading words. Okay. That's not what they were built to do. You have to know the purpose of the assessment. The purpose was not to tweak out dyslexia. The purpose was, will you pass the state assessment? Okay. And then, by golly, if they're not doing well on that one, maybe we have a problem. But you know what? The compensators cover themselves up really well on computer adaptive assessments because they have a lot of knowledge. And so then you got to tweak that out with teacher assessment and teacher knowledge and going, yeah, and then the spelling assessment. Wow. Okay, maybe that's a compensator. And so you might find the students that way. It takes a lot sometimes to find the really discrete students who have dyslexia, who may have compensated really well, who are making it through, but not really surviving that well. So hopefully that's a little bit longer answer. I can't just say, woo, I love all this stuff, because you got to use a lot. You got to use a lot.
And the sad part is we don't have that much time. You know,
No.
in the districts, in school, teachers don't have time to, there's so much going on, from social, emotional to just learning to read, or however that looks. Time.
Mm-hmm. So just know that one of the other protocols I try to employ when I'm going into a district is I kind of beg, borrow, and steal to say, whatever you can do, just get one person to do kind of the universal assessment protocol. Because once you get the data on the ground, and Lola, I bet you're just thinking of this because you were that teacher. Once that data starts to come into the PLC process and you're the teacher that's like, finally, I have data that I understand. So we got to have that data coming into the PLC process so that the teachers start to go, oh my gosh, I never knew we could have data like this. But if we don't get that data, and that one person didn't go out and at least rally the troops to get it all, it's exhausting in the beginning, but then the teachers start to do it themselves because they want the data. And so in the beginning, it's a team, and then hopefully eventually the teachers start going, no, I got to get that data. And then they're bringing the data and they're showing the data and they're showing the mastery, and then it's becoming part of their formative assessment cycle. So it's much better. But in the beginning is when it's the heavy lift, super heavy lift. Wouldn't you say, Lola? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right. Donna, do you have any other questions?
We're good. You all will get this presentation tonight, maybe, if I can upload it fast enough. Thanks for your time.
I'm sure they'll so want to watch it right away.
We had a lot of people didn't show up, so they usually watch the recording.
Yeah. So everybody, let me clarify. Mixer knob tool. Did anybody want the teeter totter risk? That one. It's on your, but I'll send those two diagrams.
Yeah, send those, because then I can just put them on the email. Okay. All right. Thanks,
all right.
dear.
Have a great night, everybody.
Wonderful.
Good to see
Very
you.
good.
Yep. Thanks. Bye.